What's up, you guys? This is Devin with CenturyFX Studios, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about the Nikon D6 because everybody's been talking about it and it's great and it's a hot button topic. But why are people so upset about the Nikon D6? This is supposed to be Nikon's flagship camera. Like Tony Northrup said, this is a camera that didn't exist before. Why are we so mad? What's going on? It's Nikon. It's supposed to compete directly with Canon and Sony and all these big camera brands, and they've been doing it for over, 100 years now? And they've been in competition, and it's bang, and it's 15 frames a second, 16 frames a second, 20 frames a second, all this other stuff. But yeah, I'm disappointed with the Nikon D6. But first, I want to let you guys know that I'm not sponsored by any company or anything like that. These are just my unbiased thoughts about it. No, I do not have the D6 or the D5 or the 1DX Mark III to do a comparison, or the A9. All these cameras that we're going to be talking about today. But I just want to talk about the Nikon D6 and the confirmed specs about it. Why? Because everybody's disappointed. Let's get right into it, but before we do, let me do another little caveat and say I shoot with Nikon, Panasonic, Sony, and Canon. I main with Canon. I shoot Panasonic for video. I've shot with the Sony a7R II. I main with the 5D Mark II, but I can also shoot with a myriad of Canon cameras, and I also shoot about once a week with a Nikon D610. And a D610 is a nice middle ground camera that really tells me all I need to know about most of the Nikon cameras out there, because they really don't change. And it's a really nice camera to see a 24 megapixel camera, 6 frames a second, full frame Nikon sensor. I actually like that camera. It's not perfect, but it gives me a sense of what Nikon is doing and what they're trying to do, what they've been doing for a while now. So I do know Nikon. For those of you who are trying to, you're a Canon tard, or you're a Panasonic tard, or you're a Micro Four Thirds tard. The Nikon D5 is a $6,500 camera. But the Nikon D6 is also a $6,500 camera. Nobody saw this not changing it. Everybody knew that Nikon was going to keep this as the same. But here's an interesting fact, that when Canon brought out the 1DX Mark II, their direct competitor for so many years, especially on the flagship end, because these cameras essentially look almost exactly the same. The 1DX Mark III came out at $6,000 instead of $6,500 like the Nikon D5 did. Apparently, Canon thought that dialing back this amount of money helped out this whole narrative that they were coming out with cheaper full-frame cameras. But then again, this 1DX Mark III, this new iteration to compete with the D6, is now again back at $6,500 for a good reason. If you're going to use $6,500 as a selling point, but gracious, when you look back into the D6, you're gonna figure out why $6,500 is not really what they really should be selling it for. They probably should be selling it for, in my opinion, $5,000. But we're gonna get into that in just a second. Now, going down to the megapixel sensor, on the D5 you had 20.8, and on the D6 you have a whopping 20.8. You might be saying, Devin, why are you harping on the megapixels? Why are you trying to be sarcastic when it comes to megapixels and give me all this drama? You know that the full frame flagships are supposed to be fast and not have heavy megapixels weighing them down like a 50 megapixel sensor. Yes, I know that, but there's a simple simple mentality when it comes to selling something, that if you can change just a little bit, you would give people the feeling that they are actually purchasing into something new. For example, the 7D Mark II and the 70D on the Canon end. The 70D had like a 20 and change megapixel sensor. The 7D that came out before it had a similar sized sensor, but it was like 1 megapixel off. And then on top of that, the 70D had a groundbreaking dual pixel autofocus in its video, and a lot of people were amazed at Canon's ability to use focusing in their DSLRs. Now, when you have this difference of 1 megapixel, but then you have a whole bunch of other specs that make you feel like you change something, and Canon advertised that, oh, technically it's a different sensor. At least people will give them the benefit of the doubt, especially if they're a Canon fanboy or a Canon fangirl. They're typically going to give Canon the benefit of the doubt if they say just one little thing is different. But you mean to tell me Nikon from D5 to D6 is just 20.8 megapixels? It's essentially the exact same thing. They're not even advertising that it's different. They're not advertising any kind of low pass, high pass filter, anything that makes it look different than a 1DX Mark III or an A9 Mark II right now. And that really was what makes me feel bad, because you might think to yourself, as a professional photographer or somebody that, I shoot all the time. I know that megapixels don't make a difference. Yes, megapixels don't really make the biggest difference in this case. But when it comes to selling a camera, numbers mean everything because specs mean everything because the people who are buying the D5 and D6 typically think they know about cameras or do actually know about cameras, and they want to see numerical specs that look different because they're technical thinkers. They enjoy the nerdy side of things. So now that you know that the sensors are the same, you're less inclined to buy it. It's literally 20.8, the exact same. Let's get into the autofocus capabilities because this is another number snafu kind of thing. Now, numbers is a really big selling point when it comes to selling a camera, especially the autofocus points, because the autofocus points is not something that you can really dictate what results you're going to get out of it, because most people say, oh, 600. Like for example, the Sony A9 Mark II has 693 autofocus points. This D5 has 153 autofocus points, but the D6 has 105 autofocus points. You might be saying, what? Wait, what? 105? That's less. Don't you think I get less focusing ability if I only have 105 autofocus points? But then this is where they sell you on. You have to understand that autofocus points have different capabilities. For example, the 105 autofocus points in the D6 is actually all cross type. So they have an easier time focusing and a faster time focusing than any other camera under the D6. Matter of fact, most DSLRs only focus great in the middle, but the middle usually has that autofocus point that's cross type or multi-cross type or whatever Canon wants to call their new autofocus point, or Nikon. But you have to understand that this focusing system of the DSLR is what keeps it in the game, because you can focus and then you have this optical viewfinder, which makes sports 10 times easier than most mirrorless cameras. The focus system and the optical viewfinder is what keeps DSLRs in the game. That's why this mirrored system is still around. Unlike point and shoots and micro four thirds, they're just really not around anymore. Now you have to think about this. You have all cross-type autofocus points, and then Nikon did also advertise that they were spreading it out just a little bit more around the rule of thirds, and then you can focus a little bit better in more particular situations. But with all that being said, it focuses better. Let's give it credit, even though it's less autofocus points. Let's go to the ISO capabilities, because Nikon is probably one of the best cameras when it comes to low light. But since Sony makes Nikon sensors, they definitely have a battling front with Sony right now. But it doesn't even seem like Nikon is giving you as much as Canon in this case. So now ISO ability, of course, Nikon is probably going to edge out Canon. The D5 has the 100 to 102,400 as the ISO capabilities native, and then extended you got 50 ISO 50 to all the way to 3 million. Now, nobody wants to take a picture at 3 million ISO because it's going to look worse than a cell phone, but the fact that the camera gives you this capability makes you feel like, oh my goodness, it's going to be great in low light at higher ISOs, lower ISOs, like 12,800 and all these 6,400, 3,200, all of these other ISOs, or all these other ISOs that are less than 3 million should be advanced. It should have less noise, it should have better color reproduction, all this other stuff, and more sharpness. Yes. And by the specs of things, I want to give Nikon a handshake on this one, because the D6 has the same specs, and we should stand to believe, since the processor actually has changed, and I'll get to that in just a second, that the low light ability has changed as well. Now, since the megapixels hasn't changed and the processor has changed, that means you're probably going to get a way better rendition of low light than you had before. Now, we're going to the card slots, whereas the D5 had the 2 CF cards and the 2 XQD cards. That's great, but going to the D6, you got to give them credit for upping it to, the CF Express cards. But here's the little caveat to the 2 CF Express card slots on the new D6. If you're able to get 2 new CF Express cards in there, and Canon can do the same thing, what makes me think that 14 frames a second is enough? That's the next spec we're about to get into, but we only have a max out of 14 frames a second on the D6, and I don't think they improved it much past that. But Canon can do 16 frames a second, and they both use CF Express card slots. My thing is, CF Express cards already cost an arm and a leg, probably more than most decent prime lenses, affordable prime lenses at the point now. And you telling me that there's a camera that has 2 of the same card slots that can do 2 more frames a second plus 20 frames a second in live view, where Nikon is not really advertising this like that. I'm not even sure what the specific specs of Nikon is in live view, but a lot of people are not saying it's more than Canon right now. And no, I do not have the D6 in my hand. I know I don't have the 1DX Mark III in my hands, but these are confirmed specs for both cameras. This is not like a rumored site rumors like we've been talking with the EOS R5 and EOS R6. No, this is specifically what they are trying to put out there. And it really makes me upset, even though I'm happy that it has 2 CF Express card slots. I can look to the future, but it really makes me upset to see this in a Nikon camera when Canon has now beat you to the frames per second punch. And back in the day, when you got a flagship camera from Nikon or Canon, you wanted to see them shoot faster than each other. If you look at any of the old digital rev videos about any of the flagship, whether it be the D4, D4S, or the 1DX Mark I, or 1DX Mark II, back when Kyle was on there especially, he always taught how fast this thing can drive at one point in time. Because you have to understand that more than anything, the drive mode on these cameras are the most sellable features for these cameras. The ability for them to be able to take pictures, period. You know, it's faster than it can process pictures faster than any other camera in the world. That's what these cameras are known for. But then now we get down to the video specs, where all of us know that the video specs on the Nikons are not comparable to the Canons. And yes, they do have 4K 20, 4K 30 and stuff like that. Now 1080 60, I believe in this camera, because in the D5 it does have 1080 60, it has 4K at 30 or whatever. So it stands for me to believe that 24, 30 and 1080 at 60, also with those 24 and 30 being the 4K specs, I can believe that. I don't think that. But the problem with video is now people are doing vlogging, they're filming with stuff right in front of them, and they don't have time to look at the back of the camera and really see things. So now you're stuck with a camera that doesn't really autofocus that well in video like Canon's can and like Sony's can. I think that Sony and Canon have better autofocusing systems in their cameras than Nikon does. Nikon was never really a big video focusing company. They always kind of struggled with the video focusing. One thing that I will give the new D6 credit for is this supposed USB-C charging. That's amazing. I've been using USB charging. As a matter of fact, I'm USB charging or powering my Panasonic G7 while I'm filming this. So I can film as long as I want to. I just filmed an event a couple of days ago. It was like 2 hours, 2.5 hours or whatever, the entire filming time. And or about 1 hour and 45 minutes, but the camera didn't die at any point. I didn't even really lose any battery notches pretty much the entire time I was recording, because I got a USB battery pack hooked up to my my G7. I don't have to worry about any drop-offs of power, so that's great. And now if you can film and actually do this with the Nikon D6, that's a great feature to have. But it's not really a game changer. Why? Because Sony has it. Sony has it. And not only does the Sony A9 II have it, but they have it at $4,500, more megapixels, more autofocus points. Then you can focus all the way outside of the screen. And then even though the ISO is not exactly the same, the ISO is more realistic on the Sony. It doesn't try to lull you into a false sense of security like you're going to use 3 million ISO. And then you have 2 UHS 2 card slots on the A9 Mark II, which is not as good as the Nikon. So we got to give that back to the Nikon with the 2 CF Express card slots. But at the same time, Nikon is not beating Canon in the CF Express card slots when it comes to using memory and stuff like that. Canon has really trounced on Nikon in this department, because not only does Canon have this faster shooting speed, but they also have a new JPEG format, HEIC I believe it's called, which allows them to have a better looking JPEG and conserve more memory. And if you're conserving more memory and having a better looking product, that's 10 times better for your CF Express card slots, because you can just shoot unlimitedly with this new JPEG format, which should make the JPEGs look even better. You see what I'm saying? And Nikon haven't even reported anything like this. They haven't brought us anything like this. As a matter of fact, they're stifling, well, from what Canon is saying right now, they're stifling the CF Express card slots and their capabilities. Come on, these are the most advanced photography shooting cards right now on the market, other than what, an SSD? And we don't use SSDs for camera because they're too big, but you have to understand that Canon has made Nikon look silly right now, because not only can they shoot faster and do all those other things, but even with the equivalent specs, Canon is doing even more. And the last thing I want to talk about is the XP6 processor. I know that Nikon has some GPS functionality that they put in there, some Wi-Fi functionality that they put in there, but it's nothing more than Canon has done. As a matter of fact, Canon has touted this new 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi connectivity to their 1DX Mark III, which is amazing and groundbreaking. I'm not sure if Nikon specifically has something like this. They have some, I guess what, NFC or Wi-Fi dongles that I've seen on the commercials, but I don't think anybody has really put a 5 gigahertz processor in a camera before. Now, on top of that, the 1DX Mark III is slated to come out before the Nikon. So I mean, Nikon is still working on this camera, because Nikon is not going to put out this D6 until April. Sometime around April is launch time, I believe. But the 1DX Mark III is supposed to be coming out late February or March. You see what I'm saying? March, people are going to have these things in their hands and getting ready for, I think, when's the Olympics? I don't know. But they're going to be ready with these things. That means Canon, not only did they beat Nikon to the punch with this camera, but it already has more than Nikon is even confirming in their camera. And Nikon still needs more time to bring it out. That's why people are so disappointed. But it went up from the XP5 processor on the D5 to an XP6 processor, which makes you think that even though you don't get too many more frames per second, you do get a better processing time. So they shouldn't have any kind of buffering because they're not trucking more memory. They're doing 20.8 megapixels, right? 20.8 megapixels on a faster processor. So I shouldn't see any buffering whatsoever. And they have 2 CF Express card slots, as long as they're not handicapping the 2 CF Express card slots. But that's what my brain is thinking right now. The 2 CF Express card slots, you might as well have 1 CF Express card slot and 1 XQD card slot. At least you can still use the card you used from your last D series camera, and it'll help you save some money as a user. It's just, oh, it's so frustrating. But the D6 has a new XP6 processor, and that's good. Anyway, guys, I'm done with CenturyFX Studios. If you've seen this part, you've probably seen the entire video. And I know this was a long video, but I really wanted to get my opinions out because I think Nikon is really, 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 really struggling. Based off of this and what they revealed about the specs and their flagship camera, if their flagship can't do much more than this, I don't know what they're going to do about their mirrorless cameras. Stay tuned for the next video.